When we think about the Saddam Hussein era in Iraq, we picture dictatorship, fear, and war. But Saddam wasn't the only source of terror. His son, Uday Hussein, became a symbol of unchecked cruelty. Behind the golden gates of palaces, while Iraq struggled through wars and sanctions, Uday lived in a world without limits. What he did, especially to women, was so disturbing that even hardened soldiers were horrified when the truth finally surfaced. Born on June 18, 1964 in Baghdad, Uday entered the world already marked for privilege. As the eldest son, he was considered the crown prince of Saddam's rule. While ordinary Iraqis faced food shortages, military drafts, and constant political surveillance, Uday lived a life of comfort. He attended elite schools, rode in chauffeured cars, and enjoyed the kind of luxury homes most citizens couldn't even imagine. To many, he appeared destined for greatness, the heir to Iraq's future. But behind the polished surface of privilege, a darker personality was taking shape. Former classmates remember him not as a friendly young man, but as someone arrogant, spoiled, and dangerously short-tempered. At school, he mocked teachers, bullied classmates, and often humiliated staff just to prove his superiority. His fascination with power was visible early on. He collected weapons and, shockingly, carried pistols even as a teenager, flaunting them like trophies. By the late 1970s, Saddam had become Iraq's president, and Uday's sense of untouchability grew stronger. Still in his teens, he sat in on political meetings and watched the secret police operate up close. He learned not just about leadership, but about control and intimidation. While other young men his age were studying or serving in the military, Uday was already walking among Iraq's elite, treated as if the nation's future belonged to him. To foreign diplomats and outsiders, Uday looked like a promising heir, the son of a powerful leader preparing to carry his father's torch. But those closer to him saw something else. An unstable young man who craved dominance, not responsibility. His early years of luxury and entitlement had created not a leader in waiting, but a storm ready to explode. One that would eventually terrify even those within his father's inner circle. In the early 1980s, Iraq was locked in a brutal war with Iran. Every day, young Iraqi men were drafted, sent to the front lines, and asked to sacrifice their lives for the nation. But Saddam Hussein's eldest son, Uday, lived in a different reality. While others faced hardship and death, he spent his nights at lavish parties, dressed in expensive European suits, and showing off gold-plated pistols as symbols of his untouchable power. These gatherings were not ordinary parties. For Uday, they became something far darker, his personal hunting ground. With the backing of Iraq's intelligence service, he began targeting young women he found attractive. Many of them were teenagers, often from educated or well-respected families. What looked like an honor on the surface, a chance to attend a special program or receive a national award, was in reality a carefully orchestrated trap. The process was chilling. Families would receive visits from officials carrying official-looking papers. Some were told their daughters had been chosen to represent Iraq in cultural events, others that they were performing a national service. But once the young women were taken away, the truth revealed itself. They were delivered to one of Uday's luxurious villas in Baghdad, where questions and resistance were met with threats. Families who tried to push back quickly learned the cost of defiance. Military officers were sometimes stationed outside their homes, silently watching, making sure no one dared speak out. Word spread quietly in Baghdad's neighborhoods. If Uday wanted something, there was no safe way to refuse. What made it worse was how systematic it all was. Inside his residences, Uday kept files on the women. Photographs, school records, addresses, and even details about relatives. Everything was cataloged, organized like a bureaucratic system of cruelty. This wasn't random misbehavior. It was a method designed to remind everyone that his power had no limits. For ordinary Iraqis, this created a climate of silent terror. Parents lived with the fear that their daughters might be noticed. Young women walked the streets with the constant shadow of being watched. Uday's privilege had transformed into darkness, turning his personal desires into a national nightmare. Fear spread like a shadow in Iraq during the 1980s, and much of it was tied directly to Uday Hussein's unpredictable actions. Ordinary families whispered his name, but rarely spoke it out loud. knowing that even words could bring danger. In neighborhoods across Baghdad, stories circulated about young women who were invited to official events and never came back. Parents warned their daughters not to trust government cars, even if they looked official. One of the earliest and most chilling stories involved a law student at Baghdad University in 1984. She left home one morning after receiving an official invitation for what seemed like an academic award ceremony. Her family never saw her again. When her father tried to ask questions, security officers appeared at his workplace and warned him to stop. Within weeks, he lost his job. The family stayed silent after that, too scared to push further. These disappearances weren't random. They were part of a system Uday had built with intelligence officers and personal guards. People close to him later revealed that he kept files on many of the women he targeted, complete with school records, family addresses, and photos. This wasn't a reckless teenager's misbehavior. It was a carefully organized method, backed by the fear of Iraq's powerful security forces. Even in the Olympic Committee, where athletes dreamed of representing their country, fear took root. Coaches quietly advised parents to remove their daughters from national programs. Families cited health or schoolwork as excuses, but everyone understood the real reason. A girl chosen for evaluation might not return. These stories became warnings, passed from family to family in hushed voices. Mothers told their daughters to avoid eye contact in public. Fathers tried to keep their children away from government functions. Yet in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, there was little anyone could do. The stories of fear multiplied, becoming part of daily life, leaving scars even on those who were never directly touched by Uday's actions. By the mid-1980s, Uday Hussein was no longer just the spoiled son of Iraq's president. He was stepping into real authority, and that made him far more dangerous. In 1985, his father appointed him head of the Iraqi Olympic Committee and also gave him control of the Iraq Football Association. These weren't symbolic roles. They gave him direct power over athletes, coaches, and staff across the country. At first, it looked like Uday might use these positions to promote sports. Iraq had always valued football and athletics as a source of national pride, but Uday quickly twisted these roles into tools for his own control. He reshaped the Olympic Committee's headquarters, adding restricted areas and surveillance systems. These weren't built for sports management, they were for secrecy. Female athletes became his first targets. Many were invited to what were called private evaluations. Some were as young as 15. Coaches and officials had no choice but to comply, and those who questioned the process risked their jobs or worse. Over time, families began pulling their daughters out of training programs, knowing what might happen if they stayed. Uday's influence didn't stop with sports. By the late 1980s, he began shaping Iraqi media. His control extended to television presenters, singers, and rising entertainers. Several young women who appeared on national television suddenly vanished, with official records claiming they had left the country. Their families, however, had no answers. Behind the public image of a modern young man representing Iraq, Uday was building his own empire of fear. The Olympic Committee and state media weren't just institutions anymore. They were hunting grounds. And because he acted under the cover of official titles, there were no investigations, no complaints, and no justice. For Iraqis, this was a turning point. Uday wasn't just acting like a reckless youth anymore. He had real positions, real resources, and official power. And that made his actions harder to escape than ever before. For years, much of Uday Hussein's cruelty happened behind closed doors. People whispered about his temper and his actions, but there was always some doubt. Then, in October 1988, everything changed. At a grand party in Baghdad, Uday showed everyone that his violence was not just rumor, it was real, and it could happen in front of anyone. The party was supposed to be a celebration. The room was full of Iraq's powerful people, military leaders, government officials, diplomats, and wealthy guests. There was music, food, and laughter. Among those present was Kamal Hana Gageo, a man who had worked closely with Saddam Hussein for years. Kamal had been trusted by the family, helping to manage events and personal matters. But Uday saw him as an enemy. He blamed Kamal for introducing Saddam to his second wife, Samira. Uday hated this marriage because he thought it weakened his own position as Saddam's eldest son. Fueled by anger and alcohol, Uday lost control. In front of everyone, he picked up a gold-handled cane, and attacked Camel. The beating was brutal. Blow after blow landed until Camel fell to the ground. Within minutes, he was dead. His body lay on the marble floor while the guests stood frozen in shock. Nobody dared to step forward. Nobody dared to stop Uday. This was no secret act. Dozens of witnesses saw it happen with their own eyes. Word spread quickly across Baghdad and even reached foreign embassies. For the first time, people had proof. Uday could kill in the open, and nobody would hold him back. What happened next sent an even stronger message. Instead of punishment, Saddam only sent his son to Switzerland for a short time, calling it exile. But this was not real justice. Within months, Uday was back in Baghdad as if nothing had happened. He returned to the same power, the same lifestyle, and the same untouchable status. For ordinary Iraqis, the lesson was terrifying. If Uday could kill a trusted member of Saddam's household in front of powerful officials and face no real punishment, then what chance did anyone else have? From that moment, people no longer saw him as just reckless or spoiled. They saw him as truly untouchable. Uday's violence no longer needed to hide. It could happen in the open, in front of the world, with no fear of consequences. And everyone in Iraq understood exactly what that meant. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the country entered one of its darkest decades. For ordinary Iraqis, life became harder with war, sanctions, and bombings. But for Uday Hussein, the chaos was an opportunity. While families struggled for food and safety, he expanded his network of personal power, targeting people more openly than before. Blacked-out vehicles were seen outside schools, parks, and universities. Young women, some still in school uniforms, were taken in broad daylight. Families were too frightened to ask questions. If they did, they faced arrests, job losses, or threats from security officers. In many cases, victims simply disappeared. By 1991, Uday had created a special unit under his direct command. This wasn't an official government agency, but it used government cars, drivers, and guards. Their task was to identify and bring young women to Uday's residences. Families who resisted were silenced quickly. Documents were forced upon them, stating their daughters had run away or were dealing with personal problems. Meanwhile, Uday's media empire was growing. In 1993, he launched the Babel newspaper and a satellite TV channel. On the surface, it looked like youthful innovation, filled with music, culture, and entertainment. But behind the scenes, it was another way to lure young performers and presenters into his circle. For many, appearing on his programs meant being summoned for private meetings they could not refuse. The 1990s also brought new reports of entertainers vanishing after private performances. Families were left with no explanations, and official records often claimed the women had left the country or died suddenly. Fear of speaking out silenced communities further. For everyday Iraqis, the 1990s felt like living in a world where no place was safe. Not schools, not universities, not even weddings. The chaos of war outside Iraq was mirrored by Uday's unchecked violence inside the country. Each year, the shadow he cast grew darker, and the hope of justice seemed more distant. By the late 1990s, Uday Hussein's actions reached into two of Iraq's most personal spaces: schools and weddings. These were places where families expected safety, tradition, and pride. Instead, they became places of fear. In schools, principals quietly received orders from the Ministry of Education. They were told to report names of well-mannered and presentable girls, phrases everyone understood as code for Uday's personal selection. Teachers sometimes tried to protect their students, leaving names off the lists or warning families in secret. But if they were caught, they faced punishment, reassignment, or worse. Government cars would arrive at family homes, claiming the girls had been chosen for awards or scholarships. Parents, often flattered by the attention, allowed their daughters to go. Some girls returned days later, traumatized. Others never returned at all. Families who asked questions were silenced. Some fathers and brothers were arrested for speaking up. Weddings, too, became dangerous. Uday often arrived uninvited, with convoys of armed guards. The joyful atmosphere turned instantly cold. Guests froze as he scanned the crowd. If he took interest in a bride, bridesmaid, or guest, she would be escorted out, regardless of the family's protests. One tragic incident in Karbala in 1998 shocked many. A young woman was taken from a wedding, and days later, her body was discovered with signs of abuse. Her father demanded justice, but he was arrested the very next day and disappeared from records. These acts changed how Iraqis celebrated and lived. Families scaled down weddings, keeping them private or quiet to avoid drawing attention. Schools stopped recognizing top students publicly. Fear dictated decisions, not tradition. By this point, Uday's actions weren't just stories whispered in private. They were part of daily life. The knowledge that no event was safe, not even the most sacred family occasions, left a permanent scar on the nation. As the 1990s ended, Uday Hussein became even more dangerous. With Saddam Hussein's health declining, Uday had more freedom to act as he wished. To ensure his victims could never speak out, he began creating secret detention centers far outside Iraq's legal system. These sites were never meant to be found. Two of them later came to light, one near Baghdad International Airport and another on the edge of Mosul. They were not shown on maps, and only men fiercely loyal to Uday guarded them. For years, ordinary Iraqis had no idea such places even existed. When U.S. forces entered Iraq in 2003, they discovered chilling evidence inside. At the Baghdad location, soldiers found a section with women only holding cells. Some of these cells were so small, they looked like closets. The walls were thick and soundproof, designed to keep every cry unheard. On the plaster walls, scratched messages told silent stories, names, short prayers, and desperate marks to count the passing days. Many women had been trapped there for months, some even for years. Doctors later revealed that during this time, they had been ordered to treat female patients brought in by military vehicles, often at night. The injuries showed signs of severe beatings, broken bones, and internal bleeding, but the doctors were forbidden from asking questions. Inside these detention centers, silence was enforced. Women were taken out only for interrogations, forced treatments, or visits they could not refuse. Guards who later spoke revealed that anyone who resisted soon vanished. Families were never told what happened. On paper, the women were reported as having fled the country or suddenly passed away. The discovery of these detention centers after 2003 revealed the depth of Uday's cruelty. His violence was not random. It was planned and hidden. These places showed he had built a system to make sure those who might speak against him were erased. For many Iraqis, learning about these prisons confirmed their worst fears, that many of the women who mysteriously disappeared during the 1990s had likely ended their days behind those sealed walls, forgotten and unheard. On December 12, 1996, Uday Hussein's life changed forever. While driving through Baghdad's wealthy Mansour district, his car was ambushed. Gunmen opened fire, hitting him with multiple bullets in the chest, legs, and spine. He barely survived, but the injuries left him permanently weakened. From then on, he walked with a cane and relied more heavily on his guards to carry out the violence he once committed himself. The attack exposed his vulnerability, but it didn't stop his influence. For the next several years, he continued his lifestyle, though less actively. Meanwhile, Iraq faced growing international pressure. By 2002, the United States was preparing for war, accusing Saddam Hussein's regime of hiding weapons of mass destruction. In March 2003, the US-led invasion began. Airstrikes shattered Baghdad, and Saddam's government quickly lost control. Uday moved between safe houses, relying on loyal tribesmen and former guards to protect him. He was spotted in Kirkuk, then Tikrit, and finally in Mosul. On July 22, 2003, U.S. Special Forces surrounded a villa in Mosul where Uday, his brother Qusay, and Qusay's teenage son were hiding. When called to surrender, they opened fire. A fierce 4-hour battle followed. By the end, all three were killed. Uday's body was confirmed through dental records and x-rays. The images of his death were broadcast widely, showing Iraqis that the man they had feared for decades was finally gone. Across the country, people gathered around televisions, watching in silence. Some felt relief, others disbelief. The death of Uday Hussein ended one of the darkest chapters in Iraq's recent history, but his victims, women, families, and entire communities were left with scars that could never be erased. Uday lived a life of wealth and power, but his legacy was built on cruelty. For those who suffered, his death came too late. Yet his story serves as a reminder of what happens when unchecked power falls into the wrong hands. Uday Hussein's life was a chilling example of how privilege without accountability can lead to unimaginable cruelty. He lived like a prince but acted like a predator, leaving behind broken families and untold suffering. History has shown us that even the most feared dictators and their children eventually face justice. Uday's end came not through wealth or power, but through the very violence he spread. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with others who enjoy history, and subscribe for more powerful stories from the past. We will see you in the next one.